So, hello and welcome to the Growing Up Conscious show. I have a special guest today, and I'm your host, Kathleen Connor. After raising two sons, teaching for over 25 years, and facilitating for Access Consciousness, I created this show for people ages 2 to 102 interested in conscious, awake, aware, joyful living. And also one of my targets is for parents and youth stakeholders to have tools to offer the youth in their life to support their thriving conscious choice. And today's special guest is kind of related to that. In fact, very related to that. My special guest name is Andrea Pope. Hi, Andrea.
Hello, good to be
And
here.
yeah, no, it's great to have you. So, many people, when Andrea Pope found out at age 60 that she had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, as we call ADHD, she moaned, "If only I had known sooner." Probably some people can relate. After 30 years as an accomplished high-end fashion jewelry designer, you can see some of her beautiful jewelry on her today, and that late in life diagnosis that led her to become a certified ADHD life coach, educator, and advocate of a new ADHD social club system she designed called the Vast Connection. I love that. Andrea is an award-winning speaker, president of the Hyde Park Speakers Toastmaster Club, while also using those very skills to promote medical and educational system changes. Andrea believes that those with ADHD must be proactive in self-advocating to acquire those medical and educational supports that fit their personal biology and mental configurations. I personally met her in a group called Thought Leaders, where we were both training to pitch some of our ideas as thought leaders. And when I heard her speak, I thought, wow, she would be a great one to come here and speak on the Growing Up Conscious show in regards to letting my audience know about her story and what she learned from it. So you have a saying, nothing for ADHDers without ADHDers. I can't even get it out. What does that statement mean?
Well, Kathleen, since ADHD is a unique neurotransmitter issue in that every single one of us is different. We're all different. None of our brains is exactly wired the same. So unless you are self-advocating with your educators, with your doctors, they can't use a blanket formula like they can, say, for diabetes or high blood pressure. Every single one of us has got to fine tune our education and to our interest, education to interest, and medical and medicine to how we are functioning. And it's constant set of tweaking. It's a constant tweak. And it's a joint collaboration between the educators and the student, the medical, and the patient.
Yes, yes,
This
I
is
can
what
get
we have to
that.
do. That's why we cannot have neurotypicals making up our minds for us because they can't. They just
Yes,
can't imagine. And it's not their fault.
yes.
It's
I know
not
as a
their fault.
teacher, that as a special education teacher for more than 25 years, and there were so many times me like with the situation where at school where I see um, the teacher interacting with a child and I'm like, oh no, 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 because I'm like seeing the go-between that occurs there. So you talk about how frustrating it was to be diagnosed with ADHD later in life. And I'd like to know more about like how you found out and what your reaction was.
Well, here's the story of how I found out. I was in a course in 2018. Um, Actually, let me correct that, 2016. And it was about relationships. And I met this relationship coach. And I was so fascinated by her system. And it was like, and I'm still like, I know I'm different. And I have been hunting for why. And I'm looking for anything that will help me understand the rest of humanity.
Yeah.
Well, we ended up doing a swap between jewelry and sort of like the first third of her coaching course
Yeah.
for her system of how to figure out humans. Well, I was a little slow on getting that jewelry out the door for Christmas. I was struggling with time blindness, which is a major ADHD symptom. And she sort of had this flash. We were on Zoom. She was down in, where was she? She was in San Diego at the time. And we were talking, and all of us just, oh, what's going on? You have ADHD. I'm like, what? What's that? Never heard of it before. And she says, all right, Andrea, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go to your doctor and you're going to tell them that when you were really, really young, you were diagnosed with ADHD. And now you didn't want to do the meds, but now you do. Just go do that. And it speeded up the system enormously.
Oh, well.
It really did. Just that. That's why she told me to do that, because it turns out her son had ADHD. And in 2020 hindsight, I realized she also has ADHD, although I didn't think of it at the time. I didn't know enough at the time.
Yes.
So that's how I found out I had ADHD, was through this other ADHDer who who uh, just twigged. And what happened for me out of that was sort of an understanding that, oh, an ADHDer can see another ADHDer. Well, as I went through my ADHD journey and learned all about it, started going to support groups, learning lots and lots about ADHD and how it works, I started realizing the more I knew, the more I could see other ADHDers anywhere I went.
Yes.
And that was cool. I had I had my first experience. I somehow segued into a bar while I was on my way to work because it was in a strange place. I was taking a shortcut. It was actually behind a brewery. And I sat down in this bar and got into a conversation which this young man actually butted into. And the other person faded away because the two of us were going blah, 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 in high power ADHD talk. Yes. Within 15 minutes, I said to him, would you by chance have ADHD like me? And he goes, oh no, not me. Except he was leading with and living and talking about the perfect ADHD lifestyle for what he was doing and what worked for his personality. Well, I eventually managed to get his phone number. He woke up the next morning with the ADHD test in his inbox, or in his text box, and says to me, phones me up and says, OMG, I'm watching my whole life on the screen. That's the first time. I'm up to 20 now, and I haven't even started the project of the Vast Connection to collect as many ADHDers as I possibly can by creating a system that gets that test into inboxes. That's
Yeah.
the effect it had on me.
Because well, yeah. So let's then jump to, I know from talking to you at Thought Leaders that being a child that wasn't diagnosed this way, maybe even if you were back then, it wouldn't have made a difference in regards to that people didn't know what it was, perhaps. But what was it like to grow up in the 1960s without being diagnosed this way and without the like mental health support, accommodations, like the support and accommodations that would have made it easier for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The first clue I had about the medical side of things, well, I would have been about 11 when a doctor said that he would put me on tranquilizers if they weren't addictive.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And I'm 11, right? And I was insulted. I was so insulted. But on the other hand, my hyperactive score is up there. It's in the 97. That's really high.
What were you like, what were you coming across in regards to like when you were in school? What kind of conflicts or like I'm always looking at mental health too and what it's like for somebody who doesn't fit the traditional format in schools. What was it like for you in schools in regards to this piece?
That is where the twice exceptional term comes in.
Yeah.
I fit that profile exactly.
Let's tell people what twice exceptional means because I know as special ed teacher what it means, but well, how would you describe it?
Twice exceptional is the story itself. My story actually tells it. On one hand, I had I have a very high IQ. So what I was doing was like learning to speed read, absorbing information really quickly, connecting dots really quickly, and able to learn. But
Yeah.
my on the other hand, my social skills sucked. They were just I couldn't connect with my own age bracket quite properly. In the playground, I kept saying and doing the wrong things. And with my hyperactive, I was running around all the time, um, and being weird. I was very weird. And then it got worse.
Can
Between
you
the
give examples of like what you mean by weird? Because that can mean so many different things, you know?
well, I would I was already reading so far above my age bracket.
Yes.
I started talking about things that I was reading, which the other kids couldn't understand.
Yes.
I just sounded like, so it would be like A, B, C, D, E, therefore M must exist. Must. And they would look at me and go, "You're stupid. Everybody knows that F comes after E." And I was like, um, um, I knew M existed, but they were right. F comes after E. But how come they couldn't see M as an obvious conclusion to these facts? Right. So I literally found myself with no one to talk to that could
Yeah.
understand what I was saying. And then I would have, then, but then in between grade 2 and grade 3, I discovered sugar at an exponential rate and I blew up. In the 60s, nobody was fat. Nobody. There were 3 kids in our whole school that were fat, and I
Yeah.
was one of them. And kids are like sharks. They go right after the kids that's different. And that was also the same time I got the big glasses, right? And they came after me. And for some reason, I became the Omega child, which is kind of like the bottom of the pack. And everybody knows what the bottom of the pack gets, the
Right.
butt end of the carcass. And I was always the last to get picked, the classic nerd fat kid, with the glasses and my teeth were all busted up from an accident and
Yeah.
patching was bad. And I had moles all over my face. They're all gone now. Thank you to modern tech. And yeah,
Is that what you call your I know you were talking about stages, like your kind of what you called your ugly duckling stage in
that
regards to,
was it. And
yeah.
being twice exceptional and being ugly and fat and smart, there isn't a worse combination. And I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. I actually thought Mother Nature had made a mistake. Like there was something clearly wrong with me. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And things at home weren't so cool either. Because my dad had ADHD. I got it from him. And things weren't super cool in our house.
Yeah.
There was some of that going on. So I was profoundly lonely. And all I did after a certain point was go home, go to my room, and read books.
Yeah.
That's what I did. by the time I was 14 years old, I was reading at university class level.
I hear so many stories of brilliant people like this, whether or not some of them are in the ADHD category, some in, like, let's say, autism spectrum and OCD. There's all sorts of different levels of brilliant people that get various different labels, but often when they're young, they feel like there's something really wrong with them, even though they're brilliant. So it's definitely not the first time I've heard that. And I've experienced that so much as a teacher as well, where, like I remember one little guy I had who he goes to take the state test and he's like, just for the fun of it, he's like, for the fun of it, could I take this in Russian? And he didn't speak Russian yet, but he was just curious about Russian. And so, that kind of brain where like, who else would say that? And the things that would come out of his mouth would just keep me smiling. He was just such a bright, engaged, in certain ways, child. But then I saw how hard it was for him in the classroom, and then sometimes the teacher would say something. I'm just like, oh no, no, no. So I could see how it would be tricky to be weird in the way you described, right? So
Yeah.
then, how did you pull yourself out of that headspace? Because I know, you've, like, as we said in your bio, you had a successful jewelry business, and there's lots of different things in life that you've been really successful at. So what was the next step for you in terms of pulling out of that space?
Well, I, sometimes lucky things happen to you. My parents, now we're talking 1972 by now. I'm 14 years old, and my ego is totally tanked. I am in Nowheresville. I wouldn't allow anybody to take photographs of me. There are no photographs of me in that time period. But I ended up at this summer camp that happened to have horses in it. What my parents didn't quite understand was what a Pentecostal Baptist summer camp was going to do to me. And I got religion into this, and I started praying. Now, we all know what you focus on expands. And I decided it was also the first time I belonged to anything. I could go to churches and stuff. And I decided that I wanted to be like everyone else. And I literally prayed my way out of 55 pounds in 6 months.
Well,
And then I looked like the other kids. And we're also changing schools. Now I'm in grade 9. And that my reputation followed me into the high school, because half the kids ended up going to that high school. And the picking on got worse. But now I'm skinny, and I don't think I deserve to be beaten up on. And finally, I let one of the queen bees of the girl gang
yeah.
have I lost my temper big time. And
Yeah.
I'm not recommending this, but there's a reason why ADHDers often don't fight, is because in my case, the reason why I didn't fight when I was back with all the children when I was young was because I was actually afraid I would kill somebody.
Yeah, because there's so much pent up energy
Feel it.
there that you're
And
managing all the time.
but there's
Yeah.
also this berserker thing that goes on where my mind just goes into 180, 200 heartbeats, and there's this blind no thinking. And for a couple of seconds there, that is exactly what that young lady got. All of a sudden, all the picking on stopped. Boom, bang. And I was like, geez, if I'd known that was going to happen, I would have done it a lot earlier.
A lot sooner. Yeah.
It was like that, but it stopped. And so now I'm slimmer. And I still don't know how to be a human being because I just spent 7 years almost completely isolated, and my best friends were in my books.
Yeah.
So this was me coming out of it, right? And now I'm taking control. But at that point, I had calluses this thick in my soul. They were huge. And I just kind of dug in and said, okay, I'm going to start running my own life. And that when I took control. Because up to then, everybody else was trying to help me or run my life. When I beat that kid up, I didn't even get suspended. And I suspect it's because everybody had been waiting 7 years for me to lose my temper.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I did it again.
also, they probably were aware of the person you were losing at, that to some degree, those bullies or those people that just be nasty. Like the community usually knows who they are too, but yeah, I'm glad it worked out that way. So you also mentioned that a lot of women get diagnosed in college with
Mhm.
ADHD. Do you want to say more about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm just going to segue one little bit back as to how I got
Yes.
into college. Being an academic type of person, I went through high school as an academic, but I didn't really pay attention to the kinds of friends I was making until about middle of grade 12. And all of a sudden, I realized that all my friends were artists. I had done no art in high school, zero art
Yeah.
in high school, none, because I thought art was play. You don't, going to high school was for work. You could tell I'm like reading university stuff here. I didn't know, right? Well, I put together. My father used to say, "Tell me who your friends are. I'll tell you who you are." My friends are all artists. I put together a portfolio in 4 months and got into the prestigious school, the Ontario College of Art, which was very hard to get into with a 4 month portfolio. Woo woo! I was going to hang out
Maybe
with
that's one of the gifts of ADHD, right? That you can whip that kind
exactly.
of stuff together, right? Because
It
there's
was
that's a great
amazing,
gift.
and I put it all together. So now I'm going to art college, except I don't have a lot of the skills that everybody else had picked up in high school,
Yeah.
and I'm away from home. I'm in an environment. My exterior frame collapsed. I had at home, we had certain set routines. I come home, mom had supper. Now all of a sudden I have to make my own supper. I got to do my own grocery shopping. And I couldn't handle that much change. And that's what happens to young ladies going to college. Those of us who don't get diagnosed, especially back then, women weren't even considered for ADHD in the late 70s. Those tests hadn't even happened. They only tested boys. They thought of it as a boys problem. Well, I was getting through school with my hyperactivity. My hands were moving all the time,
Yeah.
doodling. I was doodling all the time. Uh, yeah, right. Um, it's amazing that nobody noticed. In any case, yeah, I ended up working with my hands for a living. That's I Even though I bombed, I failed my first year of college, totally wiped out. I went to work for Canada Post for a couple of years, got more mature. That's that 3 year lag that I suddenly caught up, went back to art college, and by that time I'd picked up some other skills, a few other courses. Next thing you know, I didn't go back into first year. I jumped to second year, going
Oh,
back.
nice.
So that by then I had the maturity. If I, why, especially for art college, is not every child or youngster going into art college or any college not getting the ADHD test? That's crazy. That's when 10% of us in the whole population of the world have ADHD and they're not testing us going into college.
Yeah.
That's a for failure. And
Yeah.
but I did the go around. I did the long way around, and I did. And I ended up in a jewelry career that I loved because my hands were moving all the time. I was moving from workstation to workstation to workstation all the time. Then I was running across the city to bring everything to go get finished. Like, this is all made of copper. It's got gold on it now, but that's boring to do. So I let somebody else do it. They put the gold on, then I would have to go back and get it, right? And it was constant motion. Then I would load up my suitcases and the car or the truck or the plane with my booth, and I would run off to art shows. And then I would stand for 10, 12 hours a day selling my jewelry. Again, what am I doing? Standing and moving. It's a demo product. How do you get in this thing? Well, you have to wrap it around it. You got to adjust it. And look, you can do this
Yeah.
cool thing. You can bend it. You could see constant motion, constant activity. My hyperactive Andrea was totally happy in that lifestyle.
Yeah.
I lucked out when I took a good look at who my friends were. That pivotal sentence, who are your friends, led me to the art career. And of course, how many musicians were ADHDers? How many people in the film industry? It's huge. The numbers are phenomenal in the creative side. So
Yes.
that's my how I segued into the uh arts as a living.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think you've kind of answered like pivotal or influential experiences and people in your life, in regards to how you made that leap to being successful, even though school wasn't easy. And I can definitely see with going to college where all those what they would call executive functioning skills are required to do your own thing. You don't have the structure of your parents and everything, why that would be a time. And I can even see when you mentioned the sugar, that aspect of, I know for myself, when I have kind of anxious energy or when I'm sensing energy, when I look at it from my perspective, because I've trained in energetic body work, I see the people that get diagnosed with ADD often, as we've talked about, are highly aware. They can be aware of everybody else's thoughts, feelings, and emotions. They can be aware of other people's bodies sometimes, but they're just they're aware of the anxiety around them. They're aware of the whatever energy around them. So if they come from a family that's stressed as well, like you were describing your dad having ADHD as well, then it's that energy is always there, right? So I could see
Exactly.
why sugar could become an addiction pretty quickly, or
Mhm.
any kind of eating, like some of the kids at school that I worked with, they could work better if they had a snack, but I would try to make sure that it wasn't, too sugary, right? Because
Right.
having that snack gave them that little bit of distraction to be able to stay focused on what they were doing. Yeah.
There was
Um, yeah, go
the
ahead.
there was something I wanted to add um to that art college experience. Um I would have been about tw 24, 25. I got involved with an older man, like I was in a relationship,
Yes.
taught me about business. Now that was one of the mentor magic moments, kind of like the church camp that pivoted my life, because all he talked about was business all the time, all the time. And after
Yes.
we broke up, I knew so much more about how the world worked and how it functioned that I was able to start my own business. And with that, at the same time as that was all happening, my mother, by this time, my father had died. It had a lot to do with ADHD, although he didn't commit suicide the way many people do. Well, he kind of did. He got
But not directly, huh?
not directly. He did it indirectly. He couldn't handle the diet that goes with ADHD. The restrictive diet to control sugar and fats and that sort of thing, because it brought back post-traumatic stress from World War II. And he ended up trapped. He ended up dying of the consequences of diabetes. But I can honestly say, I now understand he pushed it. He was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day and eating whatever he felt like because he didn't want the family to lose the insurance. Now, how heroic is that?
Yes.
I didn't understand that till much later in my life.
Yeah.
But that was a heroic way to resolve a situation that he found himself completely trapped in between World War II, diabetes, and ADHD. So that 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 left my mom alone, and she had suffered a great deal being trapped between two ADHDers who were great freakout artists. She ended up doing a lot of self-help books, which she kept passing me. I was reading from about 25, 26. I was reading top of the line, the current latest self-help books and what psychocybernetics, things that, again, university class level books. That was the second mentorship. So I had business and education, emotional education. That was the beginning of my emotional education. And I
Nice.
that that is what I kept working on all through my 20s, into through my 30s, and into my 40s.
Yeah, nice. Right, because being that we have about 10 minutes left, I want to make sure we get to also that now you're moving into, even though I'm not focused on ADHD, but moving into that mentor type position for others because you want to share what you learned with others. So besides finding out about your diagnosis, what would you like? What can you share with youth or anyone? It could be any age. Like I said, the show is for 2 to 102, or whatever is going on at each stage. Like what are some of the tools you would share with youth that you'd like to explain in this format?
Well, coming from 2020 hindsight, the thing I think is the most important, more important than medication, and I'm not knocking meds. I take ADHD medication because it helps my cognitive functions. But more important than that, I learned that an emotional education can up your social game enormously. That is why I created the Vast Connection, is to generate local clubs where we can practice being social and spread the kind of the kind of education that is appropriate for ADHDers. In my 40s, I was running my own business. I had employees, but that something's wrong with me. I was getting really desperate because as the pressure gets on and I'm trying to grow this business, I'm not coming up necessarily with always the best behaviors as a boss. And I hated it because I have what I call a DEFCON 1 temper, which means I go from 0 to blow up with no time to think. Zero zip, not up. I'm hearing what I'm thinking at the same time the other person is hearing it. It's coming right out of my mouth. And I just was so frustrated that I couldn't control that.
Yeah,
And it's like having a monster in your life that jumps out when you don't want to. That's what executive function is for. In
yeah,
normal brain, executive function dominates emotions. But in my ADHD brain, you give my amygdala a nice hit of adrenaline, and I've got emotions dominating my executive function.
yeah,
And then my social life goes to hell. So I bought myself the top of the line emotional experiential course available. I came across Harvecker and Peak Potentials. This would have been about 2006. And I started to learn what it was to be the best of humanity and how you got to be that way. And these were massive, like camps for like 5 days with 18-hour days where I did things like walk on 30 feet of burning coal to learn the lesson that training is everything, everything. And facing my biggest fear of heights. I jumped off of a bridge between two mountains in British Columbia, tied to a bungee cord. It's
yeah,
we're talking about the kind of person who freezes like 5 steps up a ladder, you
yeah,
know? And somehow through all of the courses they taught fear factor, they taught uh, law of attraction, so much emotional education that without knowing I had ADHD, without knowing that um, I had all this chemistry stuff going on inside my head, I managed to up my social game 30 to 40% without drugs and without the diagnosis.
yeah,
If you know you have ADHD and you now live in the world of the internet where all the information is available to you, you have the opportunity to get that emotional education so much more easily and much less expensively than I did. And there are coaches for whatever specific aspect of your ADHD you want to work on. The language of emotional intelligence, positive thinking matters so much. And if I were to give anyone at all, what's your first line of fix it, it would be emotional education. Now, having said that, the medication helps absorbing that emotional education a little easier, and for some people, a lot easier. That's a
Yeah.
different topic, not what I wanted to talk about today. What I'm talking about is your topic, which is being self-aware, being self-aware, being conscious of how you're operating. What machine are you driving? You know, we have, motorcycles have handlebars and a gas tank and sort of a banana type seat, and they run on the road. But snowmobiles have handlebars with a throttle, a gas tank, a kind of banana seat, but they're running on treads. And a jet ski has handlebars and a gas tank and a propeller. And what are they doing? They're zipping around in the water. All of them are combustion engine, but they're not running on the same surface. You have to know what kind of machine you're driving in order to know what kind of surface you're driving. I figured out that I was driving in the arts surface. That's how I'm created a career for myself, is in the last minute, in a 4-month dash, I ran from trying to be a motorcycle to being who I really am, which is a jet ski, right? And
Yeah,
I won't, you know, or a,
that's a great way to put it.
I just I changed the surface, and I shot forward, and I did really well. And then I had to learn how to drive the machine properly. And that's what I recommend for every young person. In fact, every person who finds out they have ADHD is get that emotional education. That's the solves, because that's when you figure out who you are and how does your ADHD affect you. Because your ADHD and my ADHD are going to be different. So my advice is probably going to be useless. I could tell you what I do, and maybe one or two of my tricks will work for you, and maybe uh, that person's tricks will be, one or two of them will work for you, and that person's, and you somehow you sort of start formulating your hacks, your life hacks. How do you get around this? How do you get around that? For me, cleaning up my place means inviting everybody I know over for a party in 2 weeks. At that point, my place is getting cleaned up because my pride is way more important than my ADHD lazy. I'm rather be doing something
I can
else.
I can relate to that for sure. I can relate to that, yes. And I know from my training with energetic body work that what you're describing there, it's also, I've seen a lot of people get relief, whether it's ADHD label or other labels, from getting energetic body work, because there's so much like that, what was projected at you as a child, sometimes your body holds that information. So even if you've changed your mind consciously about certain things, if you don't also clear it out of your body, look
Yep.
at that. Yeah. Are those all superheroes?
This is actually the Star Trek, the Federation of Planets. And
Oh, got it.
I
Okay.
just had to toss that in. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But that the energetic piece of like what you can clear out of your body so your body can be calmer too, in regards to being able to choose what you'd like to choose in your life. So you want
And
to tell us about your background as we wrap up here?
it ties directly into what you're saying. Look
Yeah.
at all these different species of humanoids from the
Yes.
Federation of Planets, and all of them are going to require different kinds of um, awareness of their bodies, awareness of their brains, to be conscious of what they are, yet we all have to get along. Humanity needs to pull together a federation of humans,
Yes.
and we've got to
Yeah.
learn to get along. That back to, we need emotional education to pull it off.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important what you've been doing in your life and what I've been doing in mine for us to pass it forward.
Yeah, education, and also just like for, like I said, the parents and the teachers and the youth stakeholders, like awareness of what you might be dealing with, whether a child has a label or not, because you didn't have one when you were young, right? Of what you may be dealing with, and being able to look at things in a different way. I specifically would talk a lot about how to raise the status of a student in the class if you saw that their status was low, like what you're describing, like how you can focus on their strengths and say, like, notice what they're really good at and talk about it out loud so the other kids are like, oh, instead of contributing to that lower status by saying, why aren't you sitting down, or why aren't you doing your work? Instead, be like, oh man, that's so interesting that you're looking at it that way. It's so interesting that you need to go over to the corner to do this work or whatever, like really focusing on what everyone's strengths are, so that we can have a more balanced status and not look at it just through a school brain. So thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that you could bring your story to share with the audience, to give us a perspective and also inspire people. And I'll make sure that I'll get your link to put in the comments below. So if people want to contact you, they can. Thank you,
Oh,
Andrea.
thank you very, very much for having me, and I really appreciate it. And it's been an honor.
Same here. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. You have a great evening.
I will.